Hello there! If you haven't been living under a rock, you've probably heard that there's been quite a stir lately around Telegram. Pavel Durov, its owner and CEO, was arrested last year in France as soon as he stepped off his private jet at an airport near Le Paris. Telegram is one of the most popular messaging apps in the world, with nearly 1 billion users, placing it alongside WhatsApp, Messenger, and China's WeChat. So it's no surprise that there's been quite an uproar. I mean, how can this be? After all, Pavel is the last righteous fighter for freedom of speech. This is censorship. But EU, even worse, French. So it's a great opportunity to talk to you about the problems associated with Telegram and why it's better not to use it. Let's go! First, we'll get a bit technical, and then we'll dive into some philosophical aspects. If any part interests you more, the material is divided into chapters. But now, let's get to the point and let's start with the issue of encryption, because that's what the security-focused folks love the most. I'll make a bold statement here, which I'll also try to defend. Telegram is not a secure messaging app. It just isn't, and never really has been. First and foremost, conversations conducted via Telegram are not encrypted. This applies not only to group chats, which is a common practice among many moderately secure messaging apps, but also to private conversations between two users. That's right. Such conversations are not encrypted by default. If we want to benefit from end-to-end encryption, we have to specifically initiate such a conversation using the secret chat feature. Only then can we talk about any semblance of security and privacy. Importantly, this only applies to one-on-one conversations. In group chats, this option is not available at all. Just like in Facebook's Messenger when you're not using end-to-end encryption, and no one is trying to call it secure. Not every user is aware of this. As a result, many people download the app promising secure and private conversations, only to have conversations that are in fact encrypted, but only on the way from the user to the central server, which doesn't guarantee their safety. Why? Because the conversations can be easily stored and accessed by Telegram themselves. From experience, we know that the best way to prevent the risk of sharing data with authorities or having it accessed by some random employee who's been having a rough time is either for the operator not to collect any data at all or to lack the technical means to access it. From this perspective, it is clear that in terms of its architecture, Telegram has nothing to do with privacy. Alright, someone might say it's the user's fault. They should know they need to click something. That's fair, but there's a simpler solution. Telegram should refrain from offering unencrypted one-on-one conversations. Unfortunately, despite years of pressure for encrypted conversations to be the default option, Telegram stubbornly refuses to implement this. Why? That's a good question. Unfortunately, this is not the only issue related to Telegram and cryptography. Another problem is that Telegram doesn't use well-known, open, and widely audited encryption algorithms. They utilize their own cryptography called MTProto, which causes various uncontrolled facepalms among security professionals because it's a straightforward path to disaster. Do you want an example? A few years ago, Filippo Valsorda, an engineer involved in cryptographic topics, shared an interesting story. He's not just a random guy. He led the team responsible for the security of the Go language at Google and worked on encryption at Cloudflare, so he definitely knows what he's talking about. So, Filippo described a cryptographic flaw in Telegram from about 10 years ago, calling it a mistake that resembled a backdoor more than any other bug he had ever seen. And that's a bold claim. To preempt questions, Yes, it has since been quietly patched, and there is no evidence that the current version of the protocol has similar vulnerabilities, but it serves as an example. Practically every secure communication over the internet is based on the exchange of a pair of keys. Currently, the most popular method for solving this problem is the Diffie-Helman algorithm. It allows for the creation of a secure communication channel, even in circumstances where someone is constantly eavesdropping. How? Without getting into the mathematical proofs, the idea is that by using random number generators and large prime numbers, it's possible to establish a shared encryption key that remains secret and can't be reproduced even by eavesdropping on the process of its establishment. However, it's important to note that the key exchange method via Diffie-Helman doesn't address man-in-the-middle threats. A crafty attacker, instead of merely listening in, can act as a middleman, intercepting the key exchange process and establishing two separate encrypted connections between the sender and himself, and then another one between him and the recipient. So, while the connection is in fact encrypted, it's encrypted separately from the sender to the eavesdropping server and from that server to the message recipient. This does not guarantee privacy, as the server can read every message. Therefore, the conversing parties must also have a way to verify that they're using the same secret for encryption without revealing it to a third party. In secure messengers, this can often be done by comparing the established key using another communication channel, for example, by meeting in person. This way, it can be confirmed whether the secrets, typically represented by a table of numbers or a few words, match on both devices. If they do, the communication can be considered private and secure. Now we come to the crux of the matter. Telegram initially approached this differently. They claimed that random number generators on mobile devices were of poor quality, so they offered to help by adding another layer of randomness, which would be supplied and guaranteed by Telegram's server. However, this introduced a significant problem because it meant users had to fully trust that server. If the server determined this additional randomness in a certain way, it would undermine the entire idea of encryption, as there would be no true randomness, making it trivially easy to guess what the key was. Not only did this allow for a man-in-the-middle attack, but it also made it undetectable, because even verifying the correctness of the keys on both sides of the conversation confirmed that they matched. The server could simply possess a backdoor to the transmitted information, essentially a master key. And it wasn't merely a bug from an implementation that appeared by accident. This behavior was entirely unnecessary from a cryptographic logic standpoint and was not anticipated by the Diffie-Helman algorithm. Someone had explicitly coded this in. Has Telegram explained why? Yes. Allegedly, it was to assist with encryption for clients using devices with low computational power and weak random number generators. But this theory doesn't hold water. I know this is a story from years ago, but the bad taste remains. And I'm aware that MTProto is an open protocol that anyone can check. There's no denying that. Telegram boasts about its openness, but it isn't completely open. While the source code for the Telegram app is open, the server code is not. Telegram doesn't make it public, claiming it's unnecessary for verifying security, since there is no guarantee that the code used in production remains the same. It's hard to disagree with this assertion, but it doesn't alleviate concerns because we still don't know what exactly is happening behind the scenes. However, we do know that user data is stored on Telegram servers in unencrypted form. This includes contacts, conversations, and shared files. But back to the cryptographic algorithm. Given that it's used only within one application, it hasn't been scrutinized as thoroughly as protocols like those from Signal. In Telegram's case, when such studies or audits do occur, various vulnerabilities are often discovered. And it's not even about whether the vulnerabilities are serious or not, and what risks they pose to users. It simply confirms, once again, that one should not create their own cryptography, but rather use well-known and popular standards like TLS. It's simply a safer solution that deserves more trust than claims from anyone that their encryption is the best in the world just because it was created by Pavel Durov's brother. Security should never rely on trust. It must always be validated by solid mathematics. It's also worth noting that when vulnerabilities are reported to Telegram, fixing them does not become a priority, and they are simply patched in the next version of the app. Telegram does not typically issue hotfixes unless they prevent the use of the service, and that's not a good practice. However, it's not just about security. It's also about privacy, or rather, the lack of it. I've already mentioned that by default, Telegram has access to unencrypted messages, which means all messages when you use only default settings. Since they have access to them, they also store them. And since they store them, someone interested could access them or, at the very least, attempt to do so. For example, various authorities or government agencies may issue different warrants and engage in legal battles. But you don't even have to go that far. These messages can also be used for profiling users, such as selling them targeted ads, or they could be stolen as a result of exploiting a discovered vulnerability. Such data should not be collected at all. If something doesn't exist, it can't be shared, seen, or stolen. It's really that simple, just like with Signal, which doesn't store our messages on its servers. But since Telegram has this data and it can't be physically accessed, it's no surprise that various law enforcement agencies are trying to do so, legally or not so much. Especially when the platform almost directly targets individuals wanting to enhance their privacy for not entirely legitimate purposes. It's even less surprising that agencies try to tap into this. It's also worth mentioning that storing data requires space, and that costs money. But we'll get to the money part later, don't worry. Telegram also offers an API which allows extracting a vast amount of data about Telegram's users. This includes information such as location and all messages sent to various groups and channels, along with their dates and times. Of course, this doesn't apply to secret conversations, but analyzing this already substantial dataset can reveal a lot. For instance, it allows analyzing trends across entire societies, or can even lead to the de-anonymization of individuals. Metadata is a powerful source of information. Furthermore, this data is collected and commercially processed by various entities, including Russian ones. It would be naive to think that other authorities are not doing the same. But that's still not the end. Access to the content of transmitted messages puts the service operator under another important legal obligation in most countries: content moderation. You see, Telegram is not just a messaging app. It's an information platform, just like Twitter or Facebook, where subscribing to particular channels allows us to read the content shared through them. This is also used by various criminals to share illegal content or post-drug sale advertisements, or to spread propaganda from all sides. The ability to communicate one-on-one is essentially just an added feature, much like private messages on Twitter. Lucky for them, the limited reach of Telegram in the European Union currently excluded from being classified as VLOP, very large online platform, as it hasn't officially surpassed 45 million active users monthly. Telegram is telling they don't have enough users to be very large online platform.
Yeah.
We trust what they're showing us in the reports, in the DSA reports, in what the spokesperson are saying. I know Telegram changed a bit, like it's right now responding to the law enforcement inquiries, but I believe there is a long tradition of lying about, well, we don't have enough users because we don't want to be regulated.
Yeah.
Do you see a way around it?
Well, I have the same suspicion. They say they have 38 million, whereas the scope level is 45 million, about 45 you're regulated. So I beg to differ too, and I've asked the Commission some critical questions about that, look into it and make sure that you enter their premises and see how many users are in their systems, etc. Those are questions that we've already asked, but that's something for the Commission to find out.
All right. Once that happens, Telegram will be subject to the provisions of the DSA, Digital Services Act, imposing many new obligations that it currently struggles with, and that's not a decent prospect. Is it simply a battle against the system? Research conducted on Russians shows, no, this won't be a dry joke, although I felt the temptation. So it turns out that over 2/3 of the Russian population gets their information about the world from Telegram. In comparison, less than half of Russians regularly use VKontakte, where unfavorable content toward the authorities disappears quite rapidly. Very little tends to vanish from Telegram, unless the FSB personally goes after the author of such content. Does this mean that Durov and Telegram are defying the Russian authorities? It may look that way. For context, if someone is unaware, Durov was also the creator of VKontakte, a sort of Russian clone of Facebook. In 2014, he publicly refused to provide the Kremlin with user data from the portal regarding anti-Russian protests in Ukraine or to block Navalny's account on the service. His refusal to cooperate resulted in the forceful takeover of VKontakte by Russian authorities. Durov then resigned as CEO and left Russia. He even published a manifesto after leaving, listing 7 reasons why he would not return. He began developing a successor to VKontakte while in exile in Dubai, which was meant to be resistant to interference from the government. Any government. And thus, Telegram was born. Well, at least that's the official story. But that's not entirely true. When German investigators checked the address of the company behind Telegram, it turned out to be just an empty office in Dubai. No one had been seen using it for 3 years. The real office reportedly remains in St. Petersburg, which was confirmed by a former employee. Moreover, very little is known about the employees in general. There are only about 30 of them, as Durov has recently admitted in an interview with Tucker Carlson. Yes, that Tucker Carlson. And it's worth noting that Durov rarely gives interviews, only posting occasional content on Telegram or, less frequently, on Instagram. But let's get back to the employees. It's a very closed environment. They reportedly have a ban on being present on LinkedIn, making it quite challenging to stalk them. Among them is Pavel's brother, Nikolai, who is responsible for the technological aspects of Telegram. It's no surprise that with such a small number of employees, they don't have time to respond to regulators and authorities. This small team, presented by Durov as an advantage and proof of the company's incredible efficiency, raises a red flag for cybersecurity experts. It seems impossible to combat attacks, especially on the scale of national APT groups, with such a trimmed-down crew. And the data collected by Telegram is a tasty target for everyone. Let's not kid ourselves. Soon after the aforementioned interview, the Telegram spokesperson clarified that the number of employees mentioned referred only to 30 developers, while the company allegedly employs another 30 in its main team. Even so, This still doesn't seem like a sufficient team if all good security practices are to be applied. Let's rewind a bit to 2018. Durov was supposedly in exile when a law was passed in Russia mandating the surveillance of citizens' communications. This also applied to Telegram, but Durov had no intention of complying. He refused to provide keys and access to the correspondence of terrorists who had attacked the metro in St. Petersburg. He was forced to do so by a Russian court ruling, but he refused to comply. The Kremlin then began attempts to block the messaging app, but these were not very fruitful. Everything else came to a halt, while Telegram continued to operate just fine. Durov stood up to the Russian authorities. But is that really the case?
The CEO of Telegram, let's not make, he made more than 50 travels to Moscow.
For no reason.
he says he has nothing to do with the Russian state. He has nothing to do with Russia. There's no whatsoever. He says he stands up against the FSB. No one stands up against the FSB. No Russian citizens does that. And why do you travel to Russia 50 times, 52 times?
It's hard to believe he could be laughing in the face of the Russian government for years while being an open opposition to the Kremlin and its services. Sooner or later, he would likely fall out of a window. Even being far, far from Moscow wouldn't protect him. Moreover, it's highly questionable, as Durov allegedly traveled to Russia multiple times, around 60 times, after VKontakte was taken over by Russian authorities. It's worth noting that this information was provided anonymously, so trust it at your own risk. However, it was also confirmed independently by a recent leak from a database belonging to the FSB related to border control in Russia. If this is true, and so far there's nothing to contradict it, it would be quite an exaggeration to claim that Durov had no business showing up in Russia because he was fighting the system. If the FSB had a bone to pick with him, those trips would definitely not have been possible. This also confirms that he didn't renounce his Russian passport after losing control over VKontakte, and the manifesto about not returning to Russia can be taken with a grain of salt. He also never publicly boasted about those visits. The only break in his travels occurred during the time when Telegram was officially being blocked in Russia due to Durov's refusal to provide user data to the authorities. He had repeatedly claimed that this was impossible within the architecture of Telegram, as the keys were only on the devices of the users and were not stored on Telegram servers, so Telegram couldn't access them. However, something changed in 2020, as the Kremlin reached an agreement with Telegram and stopped blocking it. The supposed reason was Telegram's agreement to combat extremists and terrorist content on its platform. However, the company denies that any agreement was made, claiming that it was entirely the decision of the Russian authorities, who preferred a narrative of cooperation rather than admitting technological failure. Durov reappeared in St. Petersburg and has been regularly visiting Russia since then. The authorities have certainly tried many times to exert influence over him, just as they did with VKontakte. Did they somehow come to an agreement? Many indications suggest that they did. During the protests that took place earlier this year in one of Russia's republics, Bashkortostan, it seemed that the FSB was able to use data obtained from Telegram to suppress them. The authorities also managed to locally disable Telegram, just like WhatsApp, which contradicts the notion that they can't do it. In fact, countries with much less developed internet censorship technologies, like Cuba, have managed to do so. So how come the Russians can't handle it? They've also been fighting Signal recently and with considerable success, while Facebook was also blocked without major issues and is not accessible without a VPN. Yet Telegram somehow manages to bypass these blocks. Similar reports have come from Ukraine, where Ukrainian journalists have reported that after being detained by the Russian military, they were questioned using precise quotes from their previously deleted correspondence exchanged weeks earlier via Telegram. In Russia, protesters against the invasion of Ukraine have also heard exact quotes from their private conversations during interrogations by the FSB. Bots on Navalny's channel and other opposition channels were blocked during the Duma elections in 2021. Recently, a channel that provided information to soldiers looking for ways to desert the front in the war in Ukraine was also censored. Does this mean that Telegram passed this information to the authorities? Not necessarily. That data could have also been obtained through tools like Pegasus, which extract information directly from victims' phones. The specific application used at this time doesn't matter. The data will end up in the hands of the authorities regardless. This is a possible scenario and seems likely, but maybe all the talk about blocking Telegram is just that. Talk, with little action behind it. Representatives of Roskomnadzor have confirmed in various interviews that Telegram employees have begun cooperating with state authorities. It is also said that an appropriate and mutually satisfactory compromise has been reached with Durov, or perhaps Russian authorities have simply learned to use Telegram to spread propaganda both domestically and abroad, with the gains greatly outweighing any potential risks? Or perhaps the narrative of fighting the regime is being constructed to quietly monitor and control? After all, Telegram is essentially the greatest success of Russian startup. It is used not only in the realm of the Russian world, it boasts a substantial global community, especially in India and South America. Despite earnest efforts to avoid being associated with Russia, let's not kid ourselves. Telegram originates from Russia, has Russian developers, and its offices and servers are in Russia. This, by the way, is legally required when processing data from Russian citizens. Some even label it as the best weapon of the Russian intelligence. But is there any real basis for that? The veil of secrecy is lifted by leaks of correspondence between Durov and Vladislav Surkov, one of the Russian politicians behind the plans for the invasion of Ukraine, dating back to when VKontakte was owned by Durov. In this correspondence, Durov admitted that they cooperated with the FSB, providing all necessary information about platform users. He emphasized that it was unwise to block the activities of opposition movements because it's better for them to communicate using tools that can be monitored. Any potential blockages would mean pushing those they wanted to surveil onto Western platforms, where monitoring would be impossible or more difficult. However, not everyone shares such a pragmatic approach. When Iranian authorities demanded the blocking of opposition channels, Durov agreed to their request. Does Telegram respond similarly to demands from democratic countries regarding criminal channels? As it turns out, sometimes yes, but very, very rarely. The Germans managed to exert sufficient pressure, leading to Telegram blocking many extremist channels, and the service provided a contact point for German authorities. By the way, initially, they didn't even know where to send their requests because the company operated under addresses from various tax havens. A similar case occurred in India, where Telegram provided the Supreme Court with IP addresses, phone numbers, and logins of individuals suspected of copyright violations and sharing illegal academic textbooks. Okay, but let's now follow the money and take a look at Telegram's finances. Most of Telegram's revenue comes from Russia, although the company's detailed finances are a mystery. It's worth noting, though, that Telegram is not profitable. In fact, it's burning through significant amounts of cash at an increasingly rapid pace. Estimates suggest that these amounts could have already surpassed over $500 million combined. Durov is said to have been covering all expenses out of his own pocket, using funds obtained from the sale of VKontakte, but there are limits to how long this can continue. Thus, the idea of cryptocurrency called Gram was born, based on the Ton blockchain, Telegram Open Network. It was intended to facilitate transfers between users of the app and allow for small purchases. Considering the potential market of all Telegram users, success seemed practically guaranteed. Telegram raised a considerable amount of cash from investors, including Russian oligarchs, and they even established a partnership with the German payment operator, Wirecard. Let's add that this operator is no longer in operation, as it mysteriously lost about 2 billion euros from its account under strange circumstances. An enormous international scandal from a few years ago. But let's return to crypto, as it's no surprise that nothing came of that collaboration. Similarly, the Ton project also failed at the time because the idea did not sit well with the American SEC, which questioned its legality, nor with the Russian authorities. As a result, all the substantial funding raised, around $2.5 billion, had to be returned to the investors, with interest. Thus, the idea of financing the business through cryptocurrency crumbled. Shortly afterward, however, Russian politicians began to suggest lifting the ban on using Telegram, portraying it as a viable alternative, even for government communication in case of a crisis. Durov obviously endorsed this, emphasizing that they had perfected methods for detecting and removing extremist propaganda and were perfectly capable of countering terrorist attacks worldwide, with respect for the privacy of their users, of course. Roskomnadzor then decided to lift the ban. Under what conditions? No one wants to disclose that. However, the authorities praised Durov's willingness to fight terrorism, and even Putin himself confirmed that the government reached an agreement with Telegram and everything was running smoothly. This is how the search for traditional funding began, reaching out to investors who believed in the concept. Durov managed to raise nearly $1 billion, mostly through the Russian state bank VTB, including contributions from Roman Abramovich and other oligarchs close to the Kremlin, as well as through affiliated companies and funds. Many of these individuals are under European sanctions. Telegram also issued bonds that are traded on the St. Petersburg Stock Exchange. While they mainly focused their offerings on Russian investors, they also attracted clients from other parts of the world, including United Arab Emirates. Telegram once again became a darling of the Kremlin and was cited as a significant international Russian success, with even government agencies running their official channels on it, which had previously been prohibited. Since the onset of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, these ties have seemed to tighten further. While investments are crucial, every startup eventually needs to mature and start generating profits. Hence, ads have recently appeared on the platform, along with the option for paid subscriptions for a premium package. However, revenues from both sources appear to be totally insufficient to cover current monthly costs, which include not only operational expenses, but also interests from issued bonds, amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Analysts estimate that without external investments, Telegram cannot sustain itself. Yet, despite this, it somehow continues to operate. Durov arrived in Paris from Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, where he allegedly insisted on a direct meeting with Putin. The meeting didn't happen. Immediately after disembarking from his plane at an airport near Paris, he was arrested on multiple charges, including involvement in drug trafficking, human trafficking, the exploitation of minors, and money laundering, which could lead to around 20 years in prison. Was Durov surprised by this? Well, I doubt it. He knew very well he was on the wanted list. So either this was merely a show and he voluntarily surrendered to the French justice system, or someone assured him that he wouldn't be arrested. Moreover, Durov's arrest is often portrayed by many as an attack on freedom of speech. Personally, I don't agree with that. First of all, freedom of speech doesn't mean there are no consequences for what one says or does. Secondly, when operating in a certain market, in this case, the French one, or more broadly, the EU market, one must comply with its laws. You can think those laws are foolish or disagreeable, and you can fight against them, but that doesn't change the fact that you need to comply with them. Not doing so will result in consequences. The case has created quite a buzz, with almost everyone weighing in on it, including French President Emmanuel Macron, who emphasized that France is committed to protecting freedom of speech and that nothing has changed in this regard. The law applies to everyone, and anyone who violates it must face the consequences of their actions. Ultimately, it's the courts, not public opinion, that decide these matters. According to Macron, this case has nothing to do with politics and is a result of an ongoing investigation. Elon Musk responded in a surprisingly measured tone, simply asking about the reason for the arrest. However, most comments were filled with accusations of fascism and outright statements that France has no freedom of speech at all. But what is the reality? The investigation has been ongoing since July and initially didn't focus strictly on Durov. What's the case about, you might ask? Well, there are quite a few charges. Creating a platform that facilitates illegal transactions by organized crime groups. Refusal to provide information and documents necessary for conducting lawful intelligence operations. Possession of child pornography and enabling the exchange of such content. Acquisition, transportation, possession, offering, and sale of narcotic substances. Participation in organized fraud, money laundering, importing and providing cryptographic services and tools that ensure confidentiality without the appropriate declarations, and few other issues. In summary, it primarily revolves around the lack of proper moderation of illegal criminal content, especially pedophilia, and a reluctance to cooperate in this area. Because Telegram is closer to a poor imitation of the dark web, where people believe they are anonymous, than to a regular messaging app, at least considering how it is often used. At the time of recording this material, we already know that Durov has officially been charged, meaning his arrest wasn't just a matter of investigation, but rather confirms that he is a suspect. There's even another investigation against him related to alleged misconduct involving one of his many children when they were in Paris together. The court set his bail at 5 million euros, which Durov paid, allowing him to be released from custody. He's now banned from leaving France and must check in at the police station twice a week, like some common petty thief. We also learned that both the French and United Arab Emirates authorities hacked Durov's iPhone back in 2017 as part of Operation Purple Music, which was linked to recruiting new ISIS terrorists through Telegram. There is also no talk of extradition since Durov is a French citizen. He obtained citizenship 3 years ago under somewhat unclear circumstances, with President Macron, an avid fan and user of Telegram, inviting Durov to dinner in 2018. Yes, this was after the aforementioned Operation Purple Music. Macron allegedly proposed relocating Telegram's office to France, but the proposal did not gain traction. It only resulted in Durov getting another passport for his collection. Durov's arrest really made waves, not just in European media, but also in the Russian military blogosphere. This situation could even be described as a mild panic. Why? Well, Telegram is widely used by both the Russian military and various agencies, which the Russians themselves emphasize at every turn. It's utilized for everything from discussing offensive actions to high-level communications. Official bans don't seem to do much about it. So, no wonder there is a growing push for a military alternative, with some suggesting that shutting down Telegram could practically paralyze the Russian military. That might be a bit of an exaggeration, but it paints a pretty amusing picture, I have to admit. In the midst of all this, a propaganda effect has been achieved, raising doubts among Russian officials. In response, we saw Russian hacktivists launching attacks that blocked access to websites of the French cybersecurity agency dealing with Durov's case. And not just that. After all, nothing demonstrates strength quite like a DDoS attack, right? Telegram also chimed in on the situation, of course, posting about it on their Telegram channel and Twitter. They claim they follow European laws, including the Digital Services Act, stating that moderation on the platform meets the standards used by other competitive entities. They also point out that arresting their CEO over the content shared on their platform is pretty absurd. Then there is Sergei Lavrov, the ever-popular champion of free speech. He weighed in, saying that Durov's arrest is about getting access to conversations happening on Telegram, which supposedly proves the platform's security. What a twist, right? He seems to have forgotten that he once called for blocking Telegram in Russia. There also is an open letter from Alexei Nechaev, a leader of a political party in the coalition backing Putin. He's calling for support and demanding Durov's immediate release in connection with absurd charges. Naturally, he refers to freedom of speech and the French Constitution. Interestingly, one of the recipients of this letter is Marine Le Pen, the far-right leader often linked to Russian influences. Not a random choice, for sure. So, is it a good thing that Durov got arrested? Personally, I would say no. After all, Meta doesn't behave particularly better than Telegram, but that's not a reason to arrest Zuckerberg, is it? At least, not yet. Does Telegram bear the blame for all the world's problems? No, and it would be naive to think so. In many parts of the world, Telegram is a genuine alternative that allows for safer communication for the opposition or dissidents, like in Hong Kong, Brazil, or at some stage in Ukraine and Belarus. But that doesn't mean Durov should be viewed as some kind of martyr fighting for everyone's freedom and privacy, because he's simply not. This sets a dangerous precedent, and we'll see where it leads us. I worry it won't be a better place. What to do and how to live? First and foremost, don't use Telegram. By doing so, you're handing over a huge amount of data to a company that's hard to trust. You also have no idea what happens to the data afterward. And it's not just about the extraordinary secrets you share with your friends. Using the Telegram app on your phone allows the app owners to build and analyze connection graphs between people, which can really effectively reveal the identities of those who want to remain anonymous, even including those who don't use the app themselves but are simply in your address book. I'm not saying Telegram definitely do this, but it's technically possible within their architecture, and that's a sufficient argument against using the app. Their actions over the years raise far more questions than answers, especially concerning the company's goals. The metadata they collect also reveals our habits, activity times, and locations. These individually insignificant pieces of information, when gathered into vast collections of interrelated data, can uncover truly valuable insights about entire societies. And we certainly don't want this information ending up in the hands of Russian authorities, even if it's just a suspicion. And no, it's not about saying you should use Signal just because it's supposedly great. You can choose not to trust it. In fact, you shouldn't take anyone or anything on the internet at face value. You might also not want to link your phone number to some service. That should be your choice, and there are simply other options, like Simplex. But for Cthulhu's sake, don't use Telegram, because it's just not a secure messenger. Use something built on principles that respect user privacy, something where even the server administrator doesn't have the technical ability to read your messages, because you deserve that. Given the context, it's really surprising to see the growing trend of discrediting Signal lately. Elon Musk, once a big supporter, has completely changed his stance on it. Sure, asking questions isn't a bad thing, but amid all the doubts, many of which, in my opinion, don't undermine Signal's accomplishments, a campaign has been built portraying Telegram as a supposedly far better alternative, which, I'm sure you agree, is simply misleading the public, whether intentionally or not. So, should we completely ban Telegram? I wouldn't go that far, especially since it's a valuable source of information for many researchers. It provides insight into current Russian sentiments and local news, which is an invaluable source of information for the West during the war in Ukraine. Even if the content published there is mostly empty propaganda. Oh, and by the way, the Telegram cryptocurrency project, TON, has survived the test of time and is operational. There are voices saying it is being used by Russian elites to circumvent Western sanctions. I wonder if that's true, but that's a story for another time. And that's all for today, folks. Thank you for your attention, and see you next time.